It's been over a year since poachers have been discovered on the preserve. The lions have only been here a few months. They're doing well. They're not starving anymore, but they're still not wild. They're still not lions. Jaren wanted to go home. He begged. I think he still wants to go back, but he won't say anything anymore. This is his home now. He has to face that. And I won't let him call it off because it means so much. The natural balance of the preserve is hinged on it. It means that we won't have to hunt the herbivores. Their population will be controlled without human intervention. I can't let him go, no matter how much he wants to. He has to stay. Tracy's attention was pulled to the metallic object that was hovering in the sky. She touched a button on her watch and said, "Dawn, there's an unauthorized vehicle to the southeast." She watched it float just below one of the clouds. "I don't know, it's just hovering there." She lowered the headset and watched mist spiral around the car as it drifted into the clouds. With the threat out of sight and the matter in Dawn's hands, she leaned back and rested her head against the soft, warm fur, riding Jaren's long breaths as he slept through the afternoon. The sun warmed her legs, stomach, and neck, and flies buzzed around her as a warm breeze cut through the dry grass. She listened to a clumsy bounding through the grass and waited while the sound became louder, closer. In a moment, she felt pads touch her ankles and claws grab her skin. She lifted her head to look upon the yellow fur ball that was wrapped around her legs. The cub's ears were back, and its eyes stared directly at her. It had a mean look. It opened its mouth wide, twisted its head around, and bit just below her knee. "Hey!" She sat up quickly, wrapped her hands around the cub's head, and wrestled it away from her body. The cub twisted in her grasp, and then managed to get one paw over her wrist. It wrapped the other paw around her hand and bit her index finger. Tracy managed to gain control with her free hand, and then pushed the cub away. It rolled once in the grass before it stood up again. Its ears twisted back. It crouched while its tail twitched back and forth, and then stared at a spot above Tracy's shoulder. It backed up and then turned and slowly walked away. Tracy put her hand up and touched the long, rough fur behind her. She felt Jaren's whiskers against her ear. "I could have taken care of that myself, you know." She felt his coarse tongue touch her earlobe. "All right." She reached down and grabbed her headset. "God, I hate it when you do that." She put it on and adjusted the mic. "I could have taken care of that myself," she said again. She scratched his mane. "I see how you've taken care of it," Jaren said. His voice came through with a bit of computerized growl. "Look at those scratches on your legs. You're too fragile. You can't play with us no matter how much you want to." "They're only scratches. I used to play with you." She felt his hot breath on her neck, and then listened to him growl. The headset didn't translate. It never translated those quick bursts. Tracy tried to say something, but Jaren pushed himself off the ground and simply started to walk away. Leaning back on one arm, she turned to watch him. The long, heavy arch of his back, his slow, even strides, and the tail that hovered over the ground. "Big pussycat," she said. "I heard that." She pulled the headset off. "Domesticated beast," she added. A mouse moved in and out of the brush, and a wind cut across the plain, sending long waves through the grass. Tracy wiped a little of the blood away from the scratches and pushed herself up. Tall white clouds were moving in. There was a long line of twisted trees to her right, and no sign of the antelope, zebra, buffalo. They must have moved somewhere south. The herds were still small, but they were growing. Someday they'd be large enough to cut the grass down to the ground, to stretch from one end of the plain to the other. Someday they'd introduce the hyena, but only after the line was established. Stable. Tracy's mind wandered back to a time when Jaren was a cub, the only male of the first pride, a clone of the last kings. He was strong, smart, and had figured out a way to trigger the doors, to prowl down the hall and pounce on his unsuspecting victims. The baby hunter, too small to be truly feared, except by a lost leather shoe. Tracy thought it was cute until he started to show up in her living room, terrorize the terrier, and uproot the potted plants. The king of the beasts, stalking the halls at night, searching for prey, and playfully attacking anyone that was dumb enough to carelessly walk away. At awkward hours, he'd pounce on her. She'd wake up wrestling a mass of fur and claw and teeth, and then yell at him, scream at him, until he'd back up, hide, and sulk. She'd find him, pull him back before he could escape, wrestle him to the ground, fend off his claws and his anger, and then nap with him the rest of the day. She missed those days when he was small, safe, no danger, no hunger, and no fear that the game would end. No fear that he would become wild and leave forever. But that's why they were here. She'd have to let him go. She grabbed her pack, slung it over her shoulder, and headed off toward the trees. She didn't have to go too far. Jaren had moved further back. His tail was lifted, almost touching the tree that he was standing near. It bobbed back and forth. She could see it right now, even when the brush concealed his location. She left him his privacy, moved through the trees to the other side. In front was a large dirty pool. There were lionesses leaning into the water, with their cubs beside them. One lioness raised her head, regarded Tracy with her mouth open, and then turned away. Tracy moved up to the waterfront and looked over the prints in the dark mud. The herds must have been here, along with all types of birds, and a single rhino. She let her eyes wander around the waterhole to the trees. The rhino must have moved on. Splashing water attracted her attention. She looked to see Jaren moving into the pool. He lapped at the water while Tracy let her eyes wander along the horizon. She then noticed the car descending from the sky. It was landing on the other side of the trees. She tapped her watch and slipped on her headset. "Don, the vehicle's back. It's just north of me." There was no response, so she hit her watch again and fumbled with the sensitivity on her transmitter. Only static came back from the earphone. Damn. She ripped the headset away, opened her pack, and started running in the direction of the car. Jaren ran before her. He playfully looked back at her as she pulled out her gun. "No," she yelled. "Stay out of this." Jaren ran between the trees. She followed him before he finally stopped. Tracy moved up and looked at the car beyond. Its doors were pinned up, making it look like it had wings, and no one was in sight. She moved toward it and watched Jaren pass her as he leapt toward the open door. But he was thrown away, seemed stunned. He circled on his paws and then clawed at the air just in front of him. Tracy moved up to the car as her skin started to crawl. She noticed a circle on the ground where the grass had been pushed away and slowly traced a ring around the car with her eyes. She then searched for the intruders, from the scrub, across the plain, to the trees. They were nowhere to be seen. She looked at Jaren and slipped on her headset. "Get out of here," she said. "You're not hitching a ride. Go find some place to hide until this is over." Jaren stared up at her with his dark eyes. "Stop it," she said. "You don't know what you're playing with. They'll kill you." He held his mouth open as he slowly turned his head, crouched, and moved. Tracy followed Jaren back into the trees. She watched him wait and listen and smell, and knew that she stood as much of a chance of finding the trespassers as he did. But she needed to protect him. She looked around the branches. Birds moved from limb to limb. Insects buzzed everywhere. There was a rhino further back. She looked for Jaren, but realized that she'd lost him. "Damn," she whispered. "He's gonna get himself killed." A shot echoed through the trees. Tracy turned to see a man pointing a rifle directly at the rhino. He moved out to get a better shot. She lifted her gun. "Don't move," she yelled. The man turned to look at her. He lowered his rifle, but now the rhino was charging. She turned her gun, lined it up with the rhino, tried to get a clearer shot between the trees, and then fired. The rhino's breath exploded. It tumbled and then skidded across the ground. She adjusted her gun so it would knock the rhino out, but there was another shot, and the tree in front of her exploded. Splinters penetrated her face and neck. She dropped onto one knee, spotted the other man, raised her weapon and fired, but realized her gun was at the wrong setting. He was dead before he hit the ground. She dropped her weapon, touched the trickling blood, and discovered a deep, bleeding hole. And the rhino twisted around and tried to get back up. And the first man now had his rifle pointed at her. And time was slowing down and fading to gray. She tried to plead with no sound. And then Jaren soared from out of the grass. He bounded toward the hunter and landed on him with his full force. He pushed his head closer while hands, arms, and legs struggled to push him away. They struggled as Jaren's fangs brushed along the base of his neck and crushed the flesh. Helplessness began to quiver in the limbs until no fight remained, and until the rhino seemed to appear from out of nowhere and knock Jaren away. And then the world moved. Tracy pushed herself over, clamped her hand over her neck, and stared up as leaves danced in the wind and vehicles descended from the sky. She awoke to the sound of the ventilation system and looked around, realizing that she was in a small hospital room. Reaching up, she felt the bandages around her neck. Tracy. She swallowed. Donnie? Surprised that she made any sound at all. What happened? They pulled a bullet out of your neck, he said. What the hell were you doing chasing poachers anyway? She ignored the question. Jaren, she asked. Don took a long breath. His back's been broken. It looks bad. I don't think he's going back. We've lost the dominant male. The whole thing's falling apart. She swallowed. Tracy, he killed a man. The press calls him a man-eater. They want us to abandon the project. Tracy ran her hand over her throat before she opened the door and looked in at Jaren. He was suspended on wires above a steel table, unmoving except for his slow breaths. His eyes were glazed over, and his body was wrapped up. She moved her hand over his ear. I've been worried about you, Kitty. She stared into his eyes. It looks like you got what you wanted. You'll never have to go back. And he seemed to stare back into her eyes, like he knew what she was saying, even without the translator. And she almost broke, knowing that if she lost in court, he would die. Thank you, she said, wrapping her arms around his mane and holding him. Thank you. She tracked the progress of the Pride from the satellites and helped Jaren build his strength in the months that followed. Seasons had changed on the surface, and the Prides moved with the herds. It then split without a true dominant male in either Pride. She watched Jaren's feet drag behind him as he pulled himself forward. And slowly, as his back legs regained their strength, she tried to push him, guide him along and help him eat. But he wasn't the same. He was never the same. He shouldn't be hurting Don. I don't know what to do about it. He doesn't want my help, and he won't eat. He won't even talk to me. It's only until this is over, Don said. He's not a dumb animal, Don. They should let him testify, not cage him. Those men got what they deserved. And what about you, Tracy? She looked away, unable to answer. It happened only a few days ago, when Tracy entered her living room. She looked over the shredded sofa and then picked up the chewed-on remains of the headset. Damn cat, she said. She then brought out the bloody, warm meat and tried to stop it from dripping across the carpet. Jaren didn't move. She lowered the meat to his nose. Come on, eat something, she pleaded. He still wouldn't move. She pushed him, and still there was no response, so she pushed him harder. This time, feeling his muscles tighten, and his claws rip into her side. He forced her down with impossible strength, dug tighter, and pressed his open mouth onto her shoulder blade, before he stopped. She waited helplessly, held her breath until he retracted his claws and pulled his teeth away. And then, as if to say he was sorry, he gently nudged his head into her chest. She took a breath as she reached down and felt the deep cuts, and then pushed herself away, numb and frightened. He's not happy anymore, Don. I think he wants to go back. She nodded. He's wild, she said. God, I can't face it. I can't let him go. And if I don't, they're going to put him to sleep because of what I said. My testimony. Because of me, he's going to die. Don stared up at the ceiling. A smile slowly built up on his face, and Tracy thought she knew what he was thinking. We'll lose our jobs, she said. Maybe. His smile grew wider. But success, he breathed. 2,000 years didn't breed it out of him. He has to be there no matter what. He's wild. The car filled with the smell of damp weed and earth as it slowly touched down. Leaves danced over the glass before the engines were shut off. Further out was a small mountain range. Birds circled in the air, and there were no sign of the herds. Tracy waited for the door to swing upward. She got out and looked at the back seat where Jaren was. He slowly looked up at her as she removed the transmitter. She stepped back. He reluctantly jumped out, took a few steps away, and then turned. She didn't want to let him go. I'll be back later, big pussycat. He shook his mane, danced on his front legs, and then roared. The headset didn't translate. God, she said, knowing that she would never see him again. She dropped onto her knees and held him before he backed away. He hesitated, and then moved off while she watched him go. She was alone with Don's hand on her shoulder. Success, he whispered. She tried to smile. They'll have a tough time finding him, even if they can gain the permits. She shook her head. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe it was best to leave part of herself here and fight like hell to keep it alive elsewhere. Maybe this time the game meant too much to leave behind. Maybe it was leaving her behind this time. She smiled and moved to the car, and then looked back to the plane one last time before she let it go.